The night after the rehearsal dinner, I sat alone on the edge of a hotel bed that still smelled like her perfume. Vanilla. Warm. Familiar. It clung to the air like a lie that refused to leave. My phone rested in my palm, heavy with proof. A 37-second video. No sound at first, just mouths colliding, hands remembering things they were supposed to forget. Her hands. On him. Like vows meant nothing when no one was watching. I didn't cry right away. That surprised me. I just stared at the ceiling, counting the cracks like constellations, wondering how many times I had been blind on purpose. Outside, laughter floated up from the parking lot. Our families, our friends, still celebrating love like it hadn't just been quietly murdered upstairs. I replayed the video with sound this time. The music from the speakers. Her laugh. That laugh she used to save for me. It felt like listening to my own obituary being read aloud by someone who loved the sound of their voice. I thought about confronting her. About screaming. About collapsing into her arms and begging for the truth to change. Instead, I opened my contacts. There's a moment before you destroy the life you thought you wanted, where you're not angry yet, just clear. I pressed send. And in that quiet click, the wedding ended. But my story didn't. I met her on a Thursday that felt like it was holding its breath. The sky outside was pale, undecided, like it couldn't commit to rain or sunlight. The kind of day where everything feels paused mid-sentence. I remember because I almost didn't go inside that coffee shop. The sign flickered. The windows were fogged. It looked like a place people went when they were tired of pretending they had somewhere better to be. Inside, the air smelled like burnt espresso and old paper. Chipped mugs lined the counter like survivors of past mornings. The lighting was bad in a way that made everyone look more honest. Less edited. I liked that. I ordered my drink, turned around, and there she was, sitting by the window. One leg tucked beneath her, fingers wrapped around a cup she hadn't touched in minutes. Sunlight slipped through the glass and landed on her cheek like it had been aiming for her all along. It traced her slowly, deliberately, as if the day itself had decided to pause just to look at her. I didn't believe in moments like that. Not really. But my chest tightened anyway. I stood there too long, holding my cup, pretending to scroll through my phone while actually watching the way she frowned slightly at whatever she was reading. The way she brushed her hair back, impatient with gravity. I told myself I was being ridiculous. That attraction didn't mean destiny. That beauty didn't mean consequence. Then I walked over. "Is this seat taken?" I asked, gesturing to the chair across from her, already bracing for rejection I hadn't earned yet. She looked up. And smiled. Not politely. Not cautiously. But like the question itself had pleased her. Like it was exactly what she'd been waiting for. "No," she said. "It's not." That smile felt like permission. Like fate leaning forward, elbows on the table, listening closely. I sat down, suddenly aware of my hands. My posture. The fact that my heart was beating faster than the room deserved. She closed her book but didn't move it away, as if leaving proof that she'd had a life before this moment, and would again after. I started. She told me her name first. Confident. Soft. The kind of name you could say without rushing. I told her mine, and she repeated it, tasting the syllables like she wanted to remember them. We talked. At first about nothing important. The coffee. The weather. How the place used to be better before they changed the beans. She complained about the music being too loud, then admitted she liked it anyway. I laughed at that more than it deserved. Time loosened its grip. The shop emptied and filled again around us. Cups were cleared. Chairs scraped. Outside, the light shifted, afternoon surrendering to evening without announcement. We didn't notice. We kept talking. About everything that felt important. She told me she loved old love songs, the kind that sounded like apologies sung too late. She said modern music moved too fast, didn't sit with feelings long enough. She hated silence at night. Hated the feeling of being alone in a room with too many thoughts. "I always leave a lamp on," she admitted, embarrassed. "Just so it doesn't feel like the world disappeared." I told her I understood. I told her I was afraid of wasting my life on something that didn't choose me back. The words came out before I could soften them. Too honest. Too early. But she didn't flinch. She laughed softly. Not mocking. Not dismissive. Reached across the table. Her fingers brushed my wrist. Light, brief, electric. "Then don't," she said. 2 words. Simple. Dangerous. I felt seen in a way that made me want to believe she was the answer. Like the universe had heard my quiet fear and sent me a solution wrapped in warm skin and steady eyes. I didn't know then how irony likes to rehearse its lines early. She asked about my work. My family. Listen when I spoke, really listened like the details mattered because I did. When she talked, her hands moved with her words, painting invisible pictures in the air. I memorized the rhythm without realizing I was studying for something I'd later fail. At some point she checked her phone and looked surprised by the time. "Wow," she said. "That went fast." I nodded, pretending I wasn't disappointed. Pretending I wasn't already calculating how to stretch the moment. We stood together near the door, awkward again now that gravity had returned. Outside, the city had lit up, streetlights glowing like encouragement, windows reflecting lives mid-motion. Everything looked warmer at night. "I should go," she said. I agreed, even though every part of me wanted to ask for more. Another coffee. A walk. A promise. She hesitated, then leaned in and hugged me. Long, tight. Not the kind of hug you give a stranger. The kind you give someone you expect to see again. Her hair smelled faintly like citrus. Her hand pressed into my back, grounding, certain. In that moment, something inside me settled into place like it had found its argument for hope. "See you," she said. "Not goodbye." I watched her walk away, her figure blending into the glow of the street, convinced that some invisible thread had just tied itself around my future. That this wasn't chance. That it meant something. I stayed there longer than necessary, hands in my pockets, smiling at nothing. The city moved. Cars passed. People brushed by me without knowing I'd just crossed an invisible line. When I got home, the silence felt different. Less heavy. Like it was waiting with me instead of against me. I replayed her laugh in my head. The way she said my name. The feel of her fingers on my wrist. I smiled at nothing. That should have scared me. Because that's how it starts, not with fireworks or warnings, but with a quiet certainty you don't question. With hope slipping in unnoticed, unpacking its bags without asking how long it's allowed to stay. I went to sleep thinking of her by the window, sunlight on her cheek. Unaware that the same light cast shadows. And that someday I'd be standing in one she helped create. Loving her felt like learning a new language. One without a dictionary, one where every mistake mattered. I studied her the way people study maps before crossing oceans. Carefully. Quietly. Afraid of getting lost but more afraid of never trying. I learned her moods before she learned to name them. The way her jaw tightened when she was overwhelmed. The way she went quiet instead of asking for space, as if silence could protect her from needing too much. I noticed how she lingered near windows when anxious, like light reassured her that the world was still there. She never asked for reassurance directly. She just hovered near it. So I offered it preemptively. Again. And again. I became good at filling gaps she never admitted were empty. I showed up early. Stayed late. Texted first. Apologized faster than necessary. It didn't feel like sacrifice at the time. It felt like fluency. Like love done right. We built routines that felt sacred, as if repeating them made them permanent. Sunday mornings tangled in sheets. Sunlight spilling across our legs like spilled secrets. She traced lazy shapes on my chest while pretending not to think about the week ahead. I'd listen to her breathing slow, convinced that if I stayed still enough, nothing bad could reach us. Late-night drives became our escape. No destination. No playlist we fully agreed on. Just the road and the illusion that motion meant progress. She'd rest her head on my shoulder at red lights, and I'd straighten instinctively, trying to become something solid. Something safe. "You're my calm," she told me once, half asleep. I didn't hesitate. "You're my home," I said back. Homes, I would later learn, can be temporary structures. Beautiful. Necessary. Not always built to last. She brought pieces of herself to me slowly. Childhood stories she pretended didn't matter. Old disappointments she framed as jokes. Dreams she spoke about carefully like they might break if handled too roughly. I held them all with reverence, unaware that I was slowly placing my own needs further and further out of reach. Sometimes when we argued she shut down completely. Eyes distant. Arms crossed like doors she wouldn't unlock. I learned to soften my voice, to concede ground even when I didn't understand what I was apologizing for. Peace felt more important than being right. That became a habit. She talked about her ex sometimes. Casually. Like an old scar she swore didn't hurt anymore. His name slipped into conversations like an afterthought. A memory with sharp edges sanded down by time. "He and I were just wrong for each other," she'd say, shrugging. "I don't even think about him anymore." I listened too carefully. Asked too few questions. Love made me generous with my silence. I told myself it was maturity. That jealousy was childish. That trust meant not prying into closed chapters. But sometimes when his name appeared on her phone, her fingers moved too fast. Sometimes her smile dimmed in a way that didn't match her words. I noticed. I always noticed. I just chose not to name it. I gave more than I realized. Time that could have been mine. Energy I didn't replenish. Belief when doubt would have been safer. I reshaped parts of myself so she'd fit more comfortably, sanding down my edges so she wouldn't feel crowded. I stopped saying no as often. Stopped challenging things that made me uneasy. Started believing that love was measured by how much you could endure quietly. She never asked me to do that. But she never stopped me either. That should have been my first warning. Instead, I took it as a sign of commitment. I told myself real love required adaptation. That bending didn't mean breaking. That one day she'd notice how much space I'd made for her and choose me more carefully because of it. We moved faster than we admitted. Weekends blurred into weekdays. Toothbrushes multiplied. Her clothes appeared in my closet like declarations she didn't need to say out loud. We talked about the future in vague, glowing terms. Places we might live, children we might have, versions of ourselves that seemed inevitable just because we wanted them badly enough. One night, it rained so hard the city disappeared. We sat on the floor, backs against the couch, watching water streak down the windows like the world was crying quietly for us. She rested her head on my shoulder and said almost absent-mindedly, "Promise you won't leave." I promised. Immediately. Without conditions. She didn't promise back. The proposal happened on a day so bright it felt staged. Blue sky. Open air. Our families nearby, pretending not to watch while watching closely. My hands shook when I got down on one knee, the ring heavier than I expected. Not because of doubt, but because of hope. She gasped, covered her mouth, cried like the moment had finally caught up to her. "Yes," she said through tears. "Yes." The world cracked open in color. Applause erupted. Cameras flashed. People hugged us like we'd already won something. I felt lightheaded, like I'd stepped into the version of my life I'd been rehearsing for months. I believed completely that devotion, given fully, always came back. That if you loved someone hard enough, carefully enough, they would eventually choose you with the same certainty. That effort was currency. That consistency earned loyalty. I didn't know some people accept love the way they accept gifts. Graciously. Habitually. Without ever planning to give one back. That night, after everyone left, she fell asleep quickly. Ring still on. Breathing even. Peaceful. I lay awake beside her, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rain return in soft, uncertain taps. I reached for her hand, tracing the ring with my thumb like it was a symbol I needed to memorize. I didn't feel fear then. Just responsibility. And somewhere, deep beneath that feeling, a quiet question tried to surface. I pushed it back down. Love, I believed, was supposed to feel like this. Uneven at first, heavy with promise, asking you to trust before it ever proved itself. Outside, the rain kept falling. Patient. Persistent. Like something practicing how to erode what looked solid. The rehearsal dinner was supposed to be easy. Laughter without pressure. Toasts without tears. That gentle exhale before the plunge into forever. The room was warm with candlelight and expectation, clinking glasses and familiar voices blending into something celebratory and safe. I remember thinking that this was the last quiet moment we'd ever have, before vows, before names changed, before life locked itself into place. She looked stunning. A white dress that wasn't a wedding dress but knew where it was headed. Hair pinned just right, loose enough to feel romantic, precise enough to feel intentional. Her eyes shone when she smiled at me like promises already kept. I watched her move through the room, greeting relatives, laughing easily, radiant in a way that made my chest ache. This is it, I thought. This is the moment before forever. I stepped away to grab a drink. Just for a minute. Maybe two. I was gone long enough to nod at an uncle, accept a joke I didn't hear, check my phone out of habit. I lost track of her for maybe 10 minutes. That's all it took. My phone buzzed once. Soft. Almost polite. I glanced down, expecting a reminder, a photo, some logistical detail about tomorrow. Instead, there was a video attachment. No message. No explanation. Just a name I didn't recognize and a file that felt heavier than it should have. I didn't open it right away. Something in me hesitated, like my body knew before my mind did. The room was still laughing. Someone clinked a glass for attention. A speech began somewhere behind me, words dissolving into sound without meaning. I pressed play. The screen filled with movement, too close, too intimate. A corner of the room I recognized. The soft blur of decorative lights. Then her face came into focus. Her. Pressed against him. Her ex. The one who didn't matter anymore. The one she'd said was history. The one I'd chosen not to ask about because trust felt like restraint. Her hand was in his hair, fingers curved like they remembered exactly where to go. His mouth brushed her neck, lingered there, confident. They moved like this wasn't a mistake, but a return. Familiar. Practiced. I watched it once, standing near the bar, surrounded by people who loved us. My chest didn't explode. My knees didn't buckle. Nothing cinematic happened at all. Just a slow, hollow pull behind my ribs, like something vital had been quietly removed. I watched it again. Sound on this time. Music from the speakers bleeding into the recording. Her laugh, soft, breathy, unmistakable. The same laugh she used when she felt safe. When she felt wanted. I watched it a third time. Each time my body reacted slower. Like it was tired of catching up to bad news. Like shock had decided to conserve energy. They weren't drunk. Their movements were steady. Deliberate. She leaned into him, not away. He didn't hesitate. Intentional. I locked my phone and lifted my head. Across the room she was laughing. Head thrown back, hand resting lightly on someone's arm. Alive. Unaware. The woman I was supposed to marry in less than 24 hours, completely untouched by the devastation she'd already caused. That was the moment something inside me went quiet. Not broke. Ended. The version of me who trusted her died without ceremony, without witnesses. No gasp. No final words. Just absence. No one noticed me leave. That detail haunts me more than the kiss. I slipped past the tables, past framed photos of us leaning into happiness, past handwritten place cards and flowers chosen for symbolism that now felt cruelly ironic. The door closed behind me with a soft click that no one heard. Outside, the night was cooler than expected. The air hit my face like an accusation. I stood there for a moment, hands in my pockets, listening to the muffled sound of laughter still happening inside. Life continuing. Celebration uninterrupted. The night didn't care. I walked without direction, my shoes scuffing against pavement, the video replaying behind my eyes no matter how hard I tried to blink it away. Every step felt unreal, like I'd stepped out of a painting and left the color behind. I thought about going back in. About confronting her in front of everyone. About watching her face change the way mine already had. But something stopped me. I didn't want the spectacle. She'd already made it public. I sat on a low stone wall near the parking lot and finally let myself breathe. My phone buzzed again, messages piling up, none of them from her. People were still eating. Still toasting. Still speaking about love like it was stable ground. I stared at my hands, noticing how steady they were. That scared me. I realized then that betrayal doesn't always arrive with chaos. Sometimes it's clean. Surgical. It removes what you believed in and leaves everything else untouched, forcing you to sit in the contrast. I thought about every moment I'd chosen trust over curiosity. Every time I'd swallowed a question because I didn't want to seem insecure. I thought about the ring. The vows. The future we'd sketched together in hopeful pencil. All erased in under a minute. When I finally stood, my legs felt heavy but obedient. I walked to my car and sat inside without turning the engine on. The dashboard lights glowed faintly, reflecting my face back at me, older somehow. Sharper. I didn't cry. Not yet. Inside, the dinner carried on. Plates were cleared. Desserts served. Someone made a joke about tomorrow being the big day. Somewhere in that room she probably noticed I was gone and assumed I'd stepped out for air. I wondered how long it would take her to realize I wasn't coming back. The video sat on my phone like a sealed letter I hadn't decided how to deliver yet. Proof without commentary. Truth without framing. I rested my forehead against the steering wheel and closed my eyes. Betrayal isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself with thunder. It's efficient. Precise. And it doesn't wait for permission. Behind me, laughter spilled into the night, bright, careless, undeserved. I sat there in the dark, holding the end of something everyone else still believed in, knowing that by morning, nothing would be the same. And somewhere deep inside that stillness, a choice began to form. Quietly. Irreversibly. She didn't come looking for me that night. Not when the chairs were being stacked. Not when the candles burned down to quiet puddles of wax. Not when the last guests drifted out, laughing about tomorrow like the future hadn't already collapsed. She didn't come until hours later, when the hotel hallway was empty, the lights dimmed to a tired yellow, and the celebration had officially expired. By then I was packing. The room felt smaller without my faith in it. The walls pressed in, stripped of their promises. The bed we were supposed to wake up in as almost married felt like borrowed space now. I folded my shirts carefully, not because they mattered but because I needed my hands to do something precise. The zipper of my bag rested open like a mouth waiting to say something I wasn't ready to hear. The door opened without urgency. She stood there, still in the white dress, makeup slightly smudged, hair looser than before. Beautiful in the way disasters often are, untouched by the damage they leave behind. She watched me for a moment as if trying to read the room, as if tone could be measured visually. "Why are you so quiet?" she asked. Her voice was careful, almost gentle, the kind you use when you think something can still be fixed. I didn't answer. She stepped closer, confusion flickering across her face. "You've been distant all night." Distant. Like distance hadn't just been carved into me by her mouth on someone else's memory. I folded another shirt, placed it inside the bag, smoothed it down. Every movement deliberate, slow. I wanted the moment to stretch. I wanted her to feel the weight of waiting. "Did I do something?" she asked. That was when I looked at her. Really looked. She wasn't panicked yet, just unsettled. Like someone who sensed a shift in the weather but hadn't felt the rain. I wondered how many times I'd looked like that, confused by her silence, blaming myself before asking the right questions. I still didn't speak. She filled the quiet quickly. "You disappeared. I didn't know where you went. I thought maybe you needed air." I finally sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress dipping under the truth of my weight. I wanted to hear her explain herself into a corner, to watch which words she reached for when she thought honesty was optional. She sighed, crossing her arms. If this is about earlier, it meant nothing. There it was. It was just a moment. I was scared. Everything is happening so fast. Her words stacked themselves neatly, like excuses that had practiced standing upright. The past just came back unexpectedly. Each sentence carefully placed the weight somewhere other than where it belonged. She said his name once, casually, like invoking a ghost. I noticed how easily it came to her mouth. I stood up and reached for my phone. She watched me, puzzled, as I unlocked it, as I scrolled, as I turned the screen toward her without saying a word. I pressed play. The room filled with the soft, cruel glow of evidence. She watched the video in silence. Her breath caught halfway through. Her eyes widened, not in remorse but in calculation. When it ended, she didn't look at me right away. When she did, her face had changed. Not to guilt, to fear. That told me everything. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, like the words she'd prepared had suddenly lost their usefulness. Tears came quickly after that, spilling over with impressive timing. She reached for me, hands trembling as if proximity could undo what had already been done. "Please," she said. "Don't do this. Don't ruin everything." Ruin. As if everything wasn't already ruined. As if love was something fragile only when she might lose it. I stepped back. She sobbed harder, voice breaking into pieces she offered like currency. Apologies without ownership. Regret without accountability. She told me she loved me. That she'd never meant to hurt me. That it was just a mistake. A mistake doesn't repeat itself in front of witnesses. A mistake doesn't look comfortable. I realized in that moment that I had been carrying us alone for a long time. That every hard conversation, every emotional adjustment, every compromise had come from my side of the table. Her love was conditional, activated by comfort, withdrawn by inconvenience. Mine had been unconditional, and it had cost me more than I knew. I picked up the bag again. She cried harder when she heard the zipper start. The sound cut through the room like a final decision. I zipped it slowly, letting the sound land, letting it say what I no longer needed to explain. "Please," she whispered. "We can fix this." I paused with my hand on the handle. I wanted to believe her. Wanted to choose the version of reality where pain could be negotiated. But I couldn't unsee what I'd seen. Couldn't unknow how quickly she tried to protect herself instead of us. I thought about every time I'd chosen understanding over instinct. Every silence I'd swallowed to keep the peace. Every way I'd convinced myself that love meant staying even when something felt off. This was the cost. I walked toward the door. She followed, still crying, still reaching. Her hand brushed my arm and I felt nothing. Not anger. Not longing. Just distance. At the door I stopped. Not to turn back, but to say the one thing that had finally crystallized. "You didn't trip," I said quietly. "You chose." She froze. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway. The carpet muffled my footsteps, like the building itself didn't want to be involved. I didn't look back. Behind me the door stayed open. I don't know if she called my name. I don't know if she collapsed or stood there stunned. I only know that the silence that followed me down the hall was heavier than any argument we'd ever had. Silence can be louder than shouting. It can echo longer than apologies. And sometimes it's the only honest thing left. I reached the elevator and pressed the button. As I waited, I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket. Once, twice, insistent. Messages piling up. A life unraveling in real time. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. I stepped inside, carrying what was left of us in a single bag, knowing that the quiet choice I'd just made would soon become something much louder and irreversible. I sat in my car until sunrise, watching the sky bruise into morning. The parking lot was empty now, washed in pale orange light that felt undeserved. Night had held me gently, like it understood what had happened. Morning felt intrusive. Too honest. The kind of light that exposes things you're still trying to name. My forehead rested against the steering wheel. The air inside the car smelled faintly like her, fabric softener and something floral she never remembered the name of. I didn't turn the engine on. I didn't turn the radio on. I stayed still, afraid that movement would make the choice real before I was ready. My phone buzzed nonstop in my lap. Her name lit up the screen. Again. And again. Then her mother. Then my friends. Then numbers I didn't recognize. Everyone asking what happened, as if betrayal needed clarification. As if there was a version of this story where intent mattered less than outcome. I didn't answer any of them. Words felt dangerous. Like once spoken, they couldn't be retrieved. I closed my eyes and imagined walking back inside. Imagined knocking on the door. Imagined her tear-streaked face lifting with hope. Imagined apologies that sounded convincing enough in the quiet. I imagined forgiving her for the sake of comfort. For appearances. For the life we had already rehearsed so thoroughly it felt irresponsible to cancel the performance. I imagined choosing the version of her I loved. The one that laughed easily, that traced my chest on Sunday mornings, that said I was her calm. I wondered if that version had ever existed without conditions. My phone buzzed again. I opened it. The video was still there. 37 seconds. I watched it one last time. Not to punish myself. Not to feel angry. But to be certain. To make sure grief hadn't softened the edges or nostalgia hadn't edited the truth. I needed to see it as it was, unfiltered, unexcused. Her hand in his hair. Her body leaning toward familiarity. The ease of it. I noticed details I hadn't before. The way she smiled without hesitation. The way he didn't look surprised. The way neither of them checked the door. It wasn't chaos. It was comfort. When the video ended, I didn't replay it. I went to my contacts instead. The guest list sat there neatly organized. Names, emails, phone numbers. Friends who had traveled. Family who had rearranged their lives. People who believed in us enough to witness it. My thumb hovered. I thought about adding context. About writing something careful. Something kind. Something that would soften the blow. But the truth didn't need translation. It didn't need my emotional labor anymore. I attached the video. No commentary. No explanation. I pressed send. There was no dramatic music. No surge of adrenaline. Just a quiet click and a strange sense of release, like setting down something heavy I'd been carrying without realizing it. Sometimes honesty doesn't need a narrator. The responses came faster than I expected. Confusion. Apologies that weren't mine to receive. Disbelief that sounded like denial. My phone vibrated constantly, lighting up the inside of the car like a heartbeat I couldn't escape. And yet I felt calm. Not numb. Clear. Like I'd finally stopped protecting someone who wouldn't protect me. Her call came through minutes later. I didn't answer at first. Then again. And again. And again. Eventually I picked up. She was screaming. Crying. Her words tumbling over each other in panic and rage. She accused me of cruelty. Of humiliation. Of destroying her life. She asked how I could do this to her. How I could expose something so private. I listened quietly. Not because I agreed, but because I wanted to hear it clearly. She never said, "I'm sorry for hurting you." She said, "How could you do this to me?" That difference settled everything. I realized she wasn't grieving what she'd done. She was grieving the loss of control. The loss of narrative. The loss of being seen the way she wanted instead of the way she was. I said nothing. She begged. She threatened. She promised change. She swore it would never happen again. That it was fear. That it was pressure. That she loved me. Love, I learned, doesn't panic when exposed. It doesn't need to be hidden to survive. I ended the call. Blocked her number. Blocked her mother's. Blocked the life we were supposed to have. The sun fully rose then, spilling gold across the windshield. A new day arrived without asking if I was ready for it. The world continued, cars passing, birds calling, someone somewhere making coffee and believing in forever. No wedding. No lies to manage. Just me. I stepped out of the car and stretched, my body stiff from holding itself together all night. The air was cool, clean. It smelled like morning instead of memory. I breathed deeply, feeling something unfamiliar but steady settle into my chest. Relief. Not happiness. Not yet. But relief, the kind that comes when you stop negotiating with your own self-respect. I thought about the version of me who would have stayed, who would have forgiven quietly, who would have worn a smile through vows that already had cracks in them. I felt tenderness for him. But I didn't want to be him anymore. I checked my phone one last time before putting it away. Messages still waiting. Stories forming without my input. I let them exist without managing them. For once, I didn't need to be understood by everyone. I needed to be honest with myself. As I drove away, the venue disappeared in my rearview mirror. Flowers, chairs, plans all shrinking into something distant and unreal. The road ahead was empty, stretching forward without promises. And for the first time in a long while, that didn't scare me. It felt like space. Enough space to heal. Enough space to remember who I was before I started shrinking for love. The day moved forward. So did I. And somewhere between the fading night and the rising sun, I chose myself, not loudly, not perfectly, but completely. That choice would echo longer than any vow ever could. The days after were messy. Not in the dramatic way people expect. No screaming matches in public, no dramatic confrontations in the rain. Just fragments. Whispers. Screenshots sent without context. Stories that bent themselves into shapes more comfortable than the truth. Everyone suddenly became a narrator, editing my pain into something they could digest. Sides formed quickly. Faster than I thought possible. Some reached out with sympathy that felt heavy, like they needed my grief to validate their concern. Others went quiet, choosing distance over discomfort. Pity followed me like a shadow I hadn't agreed to carry. I let it pass through. I wasn't interested in being a victim. I was interested in being free. She tried to rewrite history almost immediately. Messages slipped through blocks via mutual friends. Long emails I didn't ask for. She said I overreacted. Said love was complicated. Said people make mistakes when they're scared. But complications don't involve rehearsal dinners. They don't involve cameras. They don't involve choices made twice. Once in the moment, once in the lie afterward. I didn't argue with her version of events. I didn't correct it publicly. Truth doesn't need to compete when it's already been seen. Silence became my boundary. And boundaries, I learned, make people uncomfortable when they've benefited from your lack of them. I moved out fully by the end of the week. The apartment echoed when I walked through it alone, every footstep bouncing back at me like a question. I packed methodically. Books first. Clothes next. Then the harder things. The ring. I held it longer than I expected. Not because I wanted it back, because it felt strange how small something could be after carrying so much weight. I placed it in its box and slid it across the counter like returning an item I no longer recognized as mine. Photos came last. I packed them away like artifacts from a life I outgrew. Us smiling on beaches. Us framed in doorways. Us pretending that chemistry and commitment were the same thing. Each photo hurt less than I expected. Pain loses its grip when truth takes over. I didn't burn anything. Didn't tear anything apart. That felt unnecessary. I wasn't trying to erase her. I was trying to stop centering her. The quiet that followed was unsettling at first. No good morning texts. No checking in. No emotional weather to monitor. I slept strangely those first few nights. Deep but restless. Like my body was relearning what it meant to rest without anticipation. Without waiting for something to go wrong. I started running again. At first, just short distances. Early mornings when the city hadn't decided what it wanted to be yet. The air sharp in my lungs. My thoughts loud enough to compete with my heartbeat. I ran until my chest burned, until emotion turned into motion. Then I ran farther. I started writing again too. Not messages. Not explanations. Just words that didn't need approval. Thoughts that didn't need to be softened for someone else's comfort. I filled pages with things I hadn't said, hadn't known how to say, hadn't believed I was allowed to think. I slept without waiting for a text that never came. Slowly the quiet stopped feeling lonely. It started feeling clean. People told me I handled it with grace. I didn't feel graceful. Grace implies effortlessness. Softness. A kind of elegance under pressure. What I felt was something sharper. More deliberate. I felt intentional. I woke up each day and chose not to engage with versions of the story that required my suffering to be more palatable. I chose not to explain myself to people who wanted entertainment disguised as concern. I chose not to reopen wounds just because someone else needed closure from a story that wasn't theirs. Intention is stronger than grace. There were moments, of course. Grocery store aisles where her favorite cereal still sat on the shelf. Songs that played without permission. Streets we used to walk down together, now lined with ghosts that didn't know they were dead. Some nights I still thought of her. Not with longing. With curiosity. I wondered how someone could hold so much and still reach backward. How she could speak about love with such certainty and still choose something so careless. I wondered if she ever noticed the weight I carried for us. Or if that weight had simply made things easier for her to avoid. But I didn't need answers anymore. That was the difference. I didn't stalk her life online. Didn't ask mutual friends for updates. Whatever version of herself she became next wasn't my responsibility to understand. Closure, I learned, isn't something you receive. It's something you decide. One afternoon, I found a letter she'd written me early on, tucked into an old book I'd almost donated. I remembered the day she gave it to me. How earnest she'd been. How she'd said, "Keep this for when you forget how much I care." I read it once, then folded it carefully and put it back. Not because I believed it anymore, but because it represented something true then. I didn't need to destroy it to move on. I just needed to stop letting it speak louder than her actions. The fallout continued without me. I watched from a distance as narratives collapsed and reformed. As people adjusted their opinions based on convenience. As the world proved once again that it moves on whether you're ready or not. And I moved with it. Not healed. Not whole. But honest. There's a strange peace that comes when you stop waiting for someone to become who you needed them to be. When you accept that love offered imperfectly doesn't obligate you to accept damage. Late one evening, after a long run, I stood by my window watching the city lights flicker on. Each one a separate life. A separate story. The glass reflected my face back at me, tired, clearer, unguarded. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. The fallout hadn't destroyed me. It had stripped me down to something simpler. Something quieter. Something I could finally trust. Somewhere in that stillness, I realized this wasn't the end of the story. It was the space between who I was and who I was about to become. And for the first time since everything fell apart, that felt like possibility, not loss. I didn't change out of spite. That's the part people always get wrong. They want transformation to be fueled by anger, by revenge, by the sharp satisfaction of proving someone wrong. But what happened to me wasn't loud or performative. It was quieter than that. I changed because I finally had space. Space to breathe without anticipating disappointment. Space to wake up without adjusting myself to someone else's uncertainty. Space to become the version of myself that had been waiting patiently behind compromise. At first, the space felt unfamiliar. Like an echo in a room that had just been emptied. I walked through my new apartment slowly the first night, listening to my footsteps, noticing how nothing argued back. The walls were blank. The air neutral. Possibility without instructions. I painted the walls a deep blue the next morning. She had always hated dark colors. Said they felt too heavy. I watched the paint spread across the white like a declaration, each stroke steady, deliberate. The room transformed quietly, becoming something richer. Something calmer. So did I. The promotion came a week later. The one I'd been hesitating over for months. More responsibility. More visibility. Less room to hide behind comfort. Before I would have asked her opinion. Calculated how it would affect us. This time I didn't. I said yes. Work stretched me in ways that felt honest. I stayed late without guilt. Spoke up without softening my words. Took up space in meetings the way I used to in my own life, before I learned to shrink for love. I moved apartments completely. Left behind rooms that echoed with almosts and maybe laters. I chose a place with big windows and uneven floors, the kind of place that felt lived in instead of staged. Morning light spilled across the hardwood like it was trying to wake me up gently. I traveled alone. The first trip was awkward. Eating alone in restaurants. Sitting alone at gates. Watching couples reach for each other out of habit. But somewhere between cities I realized something had shifted. My own company didn't need improvement. It needed appreciation. I walked unfamiliar streets without negotiating direction. Took photos no one would critique. Sat by windows and wrote without worrying if someone would feel left out. I slept deeply. Dreamed vividly. Woke up without that low-grade anxiety I used to mistake for love. People noticed. They always do when you stop shrinking. Friends commented on the way I carried myself. On how I laughed more easily. On how I listened without disappearing. I hadn't meant for the change to be visible, but when you stop bending, your spine remembers how to straighten. I didn't post about it. Didn't narrate my healing. This wasn't a performance. It was maintenance. Months passed. Then one night, her name appeared on my phone. No warning. No apology attached yet. Just her name, lighting up the screen like a memory asking permission to return. I stared at it longer than I expected. Not because I wanted to answer, but because I was curious who I'd become since the last time she'd had access to me. The message was careful, polished, practiced. She said she missed me. Said she finally understood. Said she'd done a lot of thinking. I read it once. Didn't reply. Some realizations come too late to matter. Not because they aren't sincere, but because timing is part of accountability. Growth doesn't rewrite consequences. It just explains them. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger requires engagement. I was busy. Busy building a life that didn't require betrayal to define its boundaries. Busy choosing environments that didn't ask me to explain my worth. Busy becoming someone who trusted his instincts again. Someone who didn't silence discomfort just to keep the peace. I framed a photo from my travels and hung it in the hallway. A quiet reminder of movement. Of direction. Of choosing forward even when backward felt familiar. I started dating again, not seriously, not desperately. Just honestly. I asked better questions. I listened for consistency instead of charm. When something felt off, I named it instead of rationalizing it away. Love didn't scare me. But settling did. That realization landed gently but firmly, like a truth that had waited for me to be ready. I understood now that love should feel like expansion, not endurance. That being chosen shouldn't require performance. That devotion given fully deserves devotion returned, not negotiated. The glow-up people saw wasn't about appearance. It was about posture. About no longer folding myself into smaller versions to fit unstable affection. One evening, as the city settled into night, I stood by my window again, watching lights turn on across buildings like constellations finding their place. Somewhere out there, she was living her version of the story. So was I. Only one of us was finally at peace. There was no toast for that. No applause. No social media moment to mark the shift. Just a steady sense of alignment, like my life had finally caught up to my values. And that was the quiet victory. The kind no one celebrates out loud. But everyone feels when they're near you. I turned away from the window and reached for my keys, ready to step back into the life I was actively choosing. Unafraid. Unapologetic. And no longer willing to trade certainty for comfort. The door closed softly behind me, and for the first time in a long time, the silence didn't ask for anything back. The wedding date came and went like a ghost. I didn't mark it on my calendar. Didn't set reminders. But my body remembered. I woke up before dawn with that familiar tightness in my chest, the kind that used to mean anticipation. For a split second, half asleep, I reached for my phone expecting messages, schedules, chaos. There was nothing. Just quiet. I got dressed in layers instead of a tux. Boots instead of polished shoes. I drove out of the city while the sky was still undecided, clouds hanging low and pale like they hadn't committed to being anything yet. The road was empty, stretching forward without witnesses. I parked near a trailhead I'd never visited before. It felt right to go somewhere unfamiliar. Somewhere that didn't know who I was supposed to be today. The air was cool and smelled like damp earth and pine. My breath fogged faintly as I started walking, the crunch of gravel beneath my feet grounding me in a way no ceremony ever had. Each step felt earned. Unobserved. Honest. No tucks. No vows. Just breathing. The trail climbed slowly, winding through trees that didn't care what day it was. Leaves stirred in the wind, brushing against each other like whispered conversations I wasn't meant to understand. The higher I went, the quieter my thoughts became. I thought about what I almost promised. Standing at an altar. Saying words designed to last forever. Promising patience without boundaries. Loyalty without reciprocity. I thought about how easily I would have meant every word, and how little that would have protected me. I thought about what I almost ignored. The pauses in her voice. The way my discomfort always felt negotiable. The way love had slowly turned into management. I'd been so focused on keeping things intact that I hadn't questioned whether they were worth preserving. Up here, surrounded by nothing but trees and sky, the clarity felt almost brutal. Sometimes the worst thing that happens saves you from a future that would have hurt more slowly. The trail opened up near the top, revealing a wide clearing. The city sat far below, softened by distance, like a memory that had lost its sharp edges. Clouds drifted overhead, unhurried, changing shape without apology. I sat on a flat rock and turned my phone off completely. No notifications. No updates. No reminders of what this day was supposed to be. Just me, my breath, and the steady rhythm of a world that didn't collapse just because my plans did. I imagined the version of the day that would have been happening right now. Guests arriving. Music playing. My mother adjusting my collar. Someone asking if I was nervous. Someone else telling me this was normal. I smiled faintly at that. I wasn't nervous today. I was present. I drank water slowly, watching a hawk circle overhead. I felt something loosen inside me, something I hadn't realized was still clenched. There was no performance here. No audience waiting for me to become someone else. Just space. I stood at the edge of the clearing, boots near the drop-off, wind brushing against my jacket like a hand reminding me I was still here. Alive. Intact. No revenge left to serve. I'd already let go of the need to be understood by everyone. Of the urge to correct every narrative. Today wasn't about proving anything. It was about acknowledging what survived. My heart felt steady. Not triumphant. Not broken. Steady. That felt new. I thought about her briefly, not with anger, not even with sadness. Just as a chapter that had ended where it needed to. I hoped, vaguely, that she'd find whatever she was reaching backward for. But I didn't need to be part of that story anymore. I took a deep breath and let it go into the wind. Peace, I realized, isn't loud. It doesn't arrive with applause or closure speeches. It arrives quietly after everything else has finished asking for your attention. Peace is the most honest ending love can give you when it's done teaching you. I stayed there longer than I planned. Watching clouds drift. Letting the sun warm my face. Letting the absence of expectation feel like a gift instead of a loss. When I finally turned back, the trail felt easier. Like it recognized me now. I walked down slowly, unhurried, carrying nothing but what I needed. At the bottom, I paused once more and looked back up at the path I'd taken, already blending back into the landscape, indistinguishable from any other. That felt right. Some things aren't meant to be marked forever. As I reached my car, my phone buzzed faintly when I turned it back on. Missed notifications, messages that could wait. I didn't check them yet. I sat behind the wheel for a moment, hands resting easily, feeling the quiet settle again. This day had passed. And so had the version of me who needed it to mean something specific. I drove away with the windows cracked, letting the air move freely through the car. Ahead, the road stretched on, unscripted and open. No vows binding me to the wrong future. No ghosts riding shotgun. Just the simple, undeniable fact of forward motion. And as the mountains faded behind me, I understood something clearly, finally. This wasn't the end of a love story. It was the moment the story stopped pretending and began telling the truth. People still bring it up sometimes. The video. The fallout. The drama. Casual mentions at brunches, whispered references at work, jokes tucked between laughter at gatherings I barely attend anymore. Faces light up when they bring it up, curious about the story that seemed too cinematic to be real. I let them talk. I nod when necessary. Smile when appropriate. My life no longer needs footnotes. No longer needs justification. No longer needs to pause for anyone's interpretation of my pain. I take a sip of my coffee, watching the sunlight spread across the table, warm and steady. The warmth reminds me of mornings when I wasn't thinking about anyone else's expectations. Of mornings where quiet was enough. And I remember clearly, what I took from her wasn't revenge. It was clarity. Not the kind that bursts in a flash and blinds you. Not the kind that demands restitution. It was quiet, layered, the sort of understanding that creeps in during long drives alone or when watching city lights blur past a train window. I saw myself for the first time, not the version I bent into for someone else, not the one who memorized moods or carried silence like a weight, but me, fully, unapologetically. I learned that devotion without boundaries is self-erasure. I learned that love isn't something you should carve yourself into pieces for, hoping it will fit someone else's ideal. I learned that love should feel chosen every day, not assumed. That it should return as naturally as sunlight after rain, not demanded by obligation or comfort. And that walking away when necessary is sometimes the bravest form of self-respect. I kept letters she had written. Notes she left folded in books or slipped between pages of novels I'd never finish. I read one the other day, her handwriting looping carefully, full of hope I once shared. I felt a flicker of nostalgia, not pain. Not regret. Only the quiet recognition that this was a chapter, not the story. I painted again that week. Not walls, not rooms, but canvases. Bold strokes that didn't need permission. Color that didn't apologize. Each painting, each brushstroke, felt like reclaiming a part of me that had been tentative, waiting for her approval. For love that wasn't mine to dictate. She was a chapter. Not the story. And the best part? I didn't lose a wedding. I gained myself. I think of it often when the city is quiet, when the apartment is still, when the phone is silent and my hands hover over my journal. I write with clarity I didn't have before, words flowing freely instead of calculated. I schedule trips not around anyone's schedule but my own whims. I drink coffee in the mornings without thinking, simply enjoying it. I live in spaces that are mine, decorated for comfort, not appeasement. Sometimes I catch myself smiling at memories, not because they sting but because I survived them. Because I learned that what feels like loss in the moment is often the opening for something greater. The moment I stopped shrinking, stopped adjusting, stopped justifying, I began to grow into someone worth knowing, even by myself. People see it, subtly, in the way I hold my gaze, in how I enter a room without hesitation, in laughter that doesn't ask permission, in the soft confidence that comes from someone who has been broken but refused to stay broken. That's legacy. Not a grand gesture. Not headlines or stories told over coffee. But the quiet, unshakable proof that surviving betrayal, reclaiming oneself, and choosing boundaries over blind devotion leaves marks that no one can erase. Marks that define the person you are long after the noise has faded. And when I walk past her old favorite cafe, or the place where we took photos I once cherished, I don't flinch. I don't linger. I don't debate what could have been. I only feel the echo of who I used to be, and the gratitude for who I've become. I light a candle in the evenings sometimes. Not for her. Not for the wedding that never was. But for myself. For the mornings I wake without expectation, for the nights I sleep without fear, for the space I finally claim as mine. And I smile at the flickering flame because fire, like clarity, is honest. It doesn't pretend. It doesn't apologize. It just burns. And that, I realize, is the truth no betrayal can steal. She was a chapter, not the story. And I am the author. I am the legacy.